Hello and welcome to the only podcast where we know the entire Star Wars movie slate is as fake as Ian McGregor's beard in Attack of the Clones elevators. I'm Matt.
I'm Max.
I'm Luke. I'm Luke.
Oh,
And I'm Max.
I'm still Matt. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? The elevator
Yes,
scene?
I do.
And this is Force
Okay,
for
good.
Thought.
Oh, this is for
Hello and
yes, it is.
welcome. Thanks for joining in, everybody. Matt, I am familiar with what you're talking about. Aren't there multiple scenes more than just the elevator scene where you can tell his beard was done in post for
Yes,
whatever reason,
incredibly. Well, I think it's just he shaved for a different role, and
and then it was
just a
reshoots.
pure, fake beard, which I have never really noticed that much, and is very evident this go around. For some reason, I'm watching Attack of the Clones and Empire simultaneously in 10-minute increments, the Luke Taylor way. So
Right on. That makes sense that they had to
middles.
reshoot that because watching it without that scene, George Lucas would have been like, "I'm not sure the audience is convinced that Anakin really likes Padme. We should have another scene of him and Obi-Wan talking about it."
Yes.
I'm obviously oversimplifying, and I don't mean to disparage that scene. That's funny.
No,
to
I
me.
mean that's pretty spot on.
All right. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be discussing Andor because we're coming up on Andor Season 2, and we got to make sure we get everything we ever want to say about Andor Season 1 out in the open before we talk about Andor Season 2 for the next 4 years. So today we're going to be talking about the characters of Andor and how they affect Cassian and his story arc. This is obviously, we've said many times before, and as Star Wars fans or TV and movie fans in general, we love Andor, and I would love to. I could talk about it all the livelong day. Today we're going to be talking about characters. In the future, maybe we can talk about, set design, themes, well, today we're doing characterizations, the character and creature designs, the whole gamut. But today we're talking characters. So before we
We're
get
honing
in
in.
to the nitty gritty, who's your guys' favorite character in Andor?
Saw Gerrera.
Is he really?
Really?
Probably. I mean, maybe he's not my favorite, but I think he's probably like my most underrated favorite character. Because it's like, obviously everyone loves Luthen, everyone loves Mon Mothma, but like, I don't have much
Yeah.
more to say about them. I really like the character of Saw Gerrera. I might be biased because I'm literally rewatching the Clone Wars right now, and I'm just started the Andor arc. But I always really liked him in Rogue One, which is pretty beloved, except for Saw Gerrera. I feel like that's the only thing that people came out and they were like, yeah, I didn't really care for Forrest Whitaker's character. And I'm like, I really wish we had more of him. I think he is so much more interesting than Baze and Shirut. I think that Saw Gerrera hopefully will be in Season 2 a little bit more than he was in Season 1, so that we can see him in action as opposed to some of the more
Mhm.
unnamed, I shouldn't say unnamed characters. They were all named, but less interesting or important characters, like all the characters from the whole second arc that was doing the heist with Andor. I don't know.
On Aldhani.
I really liked that arc a lot, but all the characters were kind of forgettable except for the one kid who died by getting his ribs crushed.
Nemec.
Never.
But there's
Nemec's
also
Manifesto
Vel and Cinta and Skeen,
and
who
Arvel.
are not forgettable.
Mhm.
Tamarin, who is kind of forgettable, and also the corporal Goran, who I like, but it
See,
wasn't that.
Yeah,
important.
I
just
like
hearing
all
you
those
name them
guys.
off too, I kind of forget which ones all of them were. There was
Taramin was the ex-stormtrooper, the black guy that was not the inside mole.
okay. There was the
Goran-
inside guy.
Gorn was the inside guy. Skeen
Skeen is
was
the bear.
the guy from the bear
Richie.
who got shot by Andor.
Sure.
Cinta is the medic who was not Vel, not the leader, the girl, the other
but
girl.
we only know Cinta because she's also what's her name's love interest. I mean, I feel like I know her more from that than I do this arc.
Yeah,
But I
that's
think
fair.
that's what's smart about it, though, isn't it? Is that like they're intertwined? They're like, oh, fun.
Yeah,
They-
I mean, she is, but I mean, the other characters that we've named so far weren't.
Vel
I think-
Cinta, I think, is actually a very interesting character because of her devotion to the cause that we we do know her backstory, that they killed her family. Shoot, I should fact check that quick, because they do say
Hey,
something, and it is justified. But it's interesting seeing, because like obviously everyone has their own story, and they talk about that on Aldani for a little bit. Everyone has their own reason to fight, and Cinta seems to be the most hardcore, which is most apparent on Ferrix when she's following Cassian or looking for Cassian, following everyone around and being pretty ruthless. She stabbed that one guy in the back, and Vel keeps asking like, "Oh, when's it going to be time for us? It's only time for the rebellion right now," and that's all really sad. But mostly the part that interests me the most about her is how she slaughtered the commandant's family, assumedly, which is open ended. What do you guys think about that? Did she do it? Because she takes them prisoner, and then everyone's like, "All right, you hold them here, and we're gonna go do everything else," and then we never see them again, and we see her walking away.
She's very cutthroat. I wouldn't be surprised if she did. I wonder if we're going to get an answer to that in season 2, but I feel like we won't. I feel like that's something that was intentionally left open-ended. But part of the reason I think she did too is because you're right. She is very dedicated to the cause, almost like she's willing to do bad things for the right reason. But I feel like that character was already what Saw Gerrera was kind of filling, which is why I say that Saw Gerrera, I think, would be more notable inclusion in that heist. If Saw Gerrera was a part of that, that would have made that whole arc 10 times better, in my opinion, because he's already an established character. We already know that he's willing to do terrible things for the cause, and we didn't really need to introduce a new character just for that. That's that I don't dislike Santa by any means. I just don't think she offered anything new.
I think I also feel like that's the basis of Andor. That is when you're describing, you were describing Saw Gerrera a second ago, of he was going to do bad things for the cause, but he's like, debatably a good person. I mean, I literally was like, oh, he's going to finish that sentence by saying that's Andor. But I think that's a smart thing, maybe thematically. I know we're talking characters, not themes or anything, but that's maybe thematically along Andor's way. When we know when he gets to Rogue One, he's met Saw Gerrera. He's met Cinta. He's met Vel. He's met these people, and I think he's almost like subconsciously learning from them in that regard, because they are so dedicated to the cause, and he becomes that as well. So he sees it from more than just one person. And even same thing with Marva. She is too, but she's just an older version. When
I do want to get to Marva. I want to keep talking about
Sansa,
to
and also your favorite characters, Luke. We only got to Max's so far, which we all know actually is Mon Mothma. But for the sake of argument, we'll go.
Yeah. I mean, mine too. Have you seen the way she dresses? Impeccable wardrobe.
Yours is Cyril Karn. This is not even worth.
That's right. Yeah, in my notes, the part on Cyril Karn is hardly worth talking about at this point.
I was about to say, are we talking Cyril Karn again this episode, or are we gonna?
No, we can just link to that episode in the cards, is what they always say on YouTube. I don't know if our tech department is going to be able to handle that. But Matt, you said that the Andor will obviously have met Saw Gerrera. Do they meet in Rogue One? That's why they bring in Jin, is to get an in with Saw Gerrera. Because, they explicitly do not meet before Rogue One.
Yeah,
right.
That's a great call. They do not meet. So maybe that's why they needed to have Cinta then, is in order for him to again. He's not learning. That's not a thing really that needs to be blatantly said. But I think seeing people that dedicated is what gets him dedicated. Pushed over the edge, with a mix of things. So maybe that just works out.
Yes, and it's good to just see a nice mix of different characters, because Saw Gerrera in with a little bit of retcon for that. That would be a big retcon. There are ways to write it around where Luthen could be that example for Cassian, which I'm sure he will be in season 2, but in season 1 he isn't really, and it's good for Cassian, for us the audience, to see Cassian exposed to all these different people that he will eventually become in different ways early in his story.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, Luke. And that, I want to continue on, but I've been thinking about who my favorite character is of. And I feel like I just don't want to hold this back the entire time too, and I honestly don't know who my favorite character is in the show, and I feel like I'm never usually the person that's like, oh, my favorite character is the main character. It's like my favorite character is Captain America. It's like, okay, that's kind of bland, right? You want more of those Luthens or those Kino Loys, but it's like this show is so well balanced where I think Andor impresses me the most as a character, because he is by far, and I've said this a lot in this podcast, by far my least favorite character in Rogue One. I almost feel like it's maybe by design, and then when the show was announced, right? I think all of us were like, why on that character specifically when you have all these other cool characters, specifically Bodhi. Um, but I think when Andor came out, it was just mind blowing of how much depth that like everybody else saw, and Tony Gilroy saw in Lucasfilm and everything of like this character could be so much more deep, and so it's like we don't even. It feels like the Andor is bad on purpose in Rogue. He's not bad, but like I feel like he's almost bad on purpose in order to get this amazing backstory. And so I don't want to say Andor, but I think the ensemble of even Brasso and Bix and obviously Kino Loy and Dedra are so intriguing. But I feel like unfortunately maybe Andor. But honestly, I think maybe my favorite character in the show is just the setting itself. To be honest, which is such a lame excuse and it's lame answer.
Ferrex?
Just like I mean, honestly, all of it, but like Ferric specifically, just because those sets and that atmosphere just feel so real. And I know I'm not a person that's like not very anti the volume or something, but everything in that show is very tangible, and I think the cast is all very much works together. And then I think the backdrop is a character itself, which it's also a bad excuse. I'm just gonna say Andor is my character. I've been walking around that for like 10 minutes now in this monologue.
And just for posterity, I will say Cyril Karn at this point. I want to say Nemec or maybe
No,
B2
Nemec's great,
emo,
though.
but Cyril Karn is just so captivating.
K2SO will be my favorite in the second season if he's in it a fair amount. And it's also hard to say Kino Loy because like he's only in 3 episodes. It's like hard to be like, oh, it's that. It's like, can your favorite character be in, a third of the show?
Yes, because as soon as you said that, I was like, "You're talking to the Get Fisto Focus Collector." But as soon as you said Kino Loy, I was like, "Oh yeah, obviously it's Kino Loy." But no, I'm sticking to my guns and saying Saw Gerrera. But when Matt, when you were saying that, like, you don't want to talk too much about themes or whatever, it's hard with Andor because the show is very thematic and it is very apparent in their characters because this is a very character driven story. I mean, there are a ton of characters in it, and it's hard to give each character its own place on the spectrum of where they land between doing the wrong things for the right reason or right things for the wrong reason. And so, like, I feel like, the dichotomy is most clear between, well, I call it a dichotomy, but I'm going to name 3 people: Mon Mothma, Saw Gerrera, and Luthen. Where I feel like Mon Mothma really wants to do things by the book. She would like to do it legally if at all possible, but she knows that it's impossible. So she's kind of like trying to do things like with as the least amount of like casualties as possible, do things as streamlined as possible. Saw Gerrera just wants to burn the whole thing down. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about casualties. And I feel like Luthen is kind of being torn between the two, and we're going to see which way he's going. And I feel like that's really interesting. But there's only so many different places on that spectrum that you can put these characters. And so what I feel like the show does really well with them is giving them all a different jumping on point. And we see different stories of how they get involved, why they're there, kind of going back to Cinta's story, going to who is the Mashi, the guy in jail with Cassian, Melshi. Like, I mean, he's a throwaway character in Rogue One. There was no need for them to include him, but it was just cool to see him like, oh, he was in this prison with Cassian, and that's kind of how he came around to this cause.
That'll radicalize you real quick.
Yeah, it will. So I like seeing that part, like all the different ways that people are being drawn to the same goal. But then, like I said, just kind of fleshing out how they go about it. There's only so many different ways they can do that. And that's why I like Saw Gerrera, because I feel like he is the example of hardcore radicalism. I mean, even like the rebels, I think during Rogue One, they refer to him as a terrorist. And so, like, they recognize he's taking things too far. And so, I don't know. I like that. I like that aspect a lot. I really hope to see more of him in season 2.
I agree. I also think that's like in Star Wars in general, they do such a, bad versus good, black and white, within the movies. And I think in the shows, it's able to expand a bit more and like seeing, it's like when if you're, even like obviously like in today's like political climate, you can be, super left and you can be a liberal or you could be like a socialist, right? There's like those those variations of what side you're on. Right? There's not just like you're left or you're right. It's like, oh, you're left, far right. I feel like, and then at some point it almost blends back around, and I feel like that's what Star Wars does really well is like in the show specifically, and with Saw Gerrera, I feel like he's like one of the first really big characters that like does that and like
Yeah.
hardcore. Like you said, even the Rebels call him a terrorist, and I really like that they're bringing that more into the live action stuff. Obviously, we saw that a little bit with Rogue One, but
And George Lucas always made it clear that his version of Star Wars was about good versus evil. And I feel like
yeah,
it was only later when people kind of started to blur those lines a little bit. And Tony Gilroy, I feel like, has been pretty vocal that he's like not a huge Star Wars fan. And so it
yeah,
makes sense that he is the one who can kind of best blur those lines because it is something that is almost anti Star Wars in theory, but obviously, in practice, it's a very gritty, mature Star Wars show that the fans absolutely love. And for a good reason. So I think it makes sense.
yeah. There's something too. I know. Again, we're talking themes and we're talking characters, and this is so off topic, but it's just a thought of Andor. Is that a long time ago we were talking about like, do you need to be a Star Wars fan to make Star Wars content nowadays? And I feel like something. I mean, obviously Tony Gilroy is like the perfect example of like, no, you don't need to be a fan to make it. But I think that's something that like maybe again, sorry, this is way off topic, but I mean, off topic on today's episode, very on topic for this podcast. So I don't feel terrible, I guess, about it. But there's an aspect of it I think where maybe that's where we're conflicting with a lot of the Star Wars. Well, maybe the general fandom, not necessarily us, is conflicting with the Star Wars things going on, the shows and stuff, is because like when Star Wars was made, was Star Wars, right? There was no Star Wars fans. You were just making the thing. The same thing with the prequels. It's like the same. The creators were making it, so they were done with like Star Wars fan involved. Like obviously, besides like the people behind the scenes in the prequels. But there's I think just an element in general where you just want good storytelling, and you can put Star Wars on not on top of it necessarily because you have to intertwine those. But people just want good storytelling, and I think that is what Andor does so well. And it's just like it doesn't matter that if Tony Gilroy is a Star Wars fan or not. He just knows how to tell a really good story, and it just perchance is in the Star Wars universe. Thank God,
Yeah.
and not like Star Trek or something.
Yeah, I think it depends what kind of Star Wars characters and era you're dealing with, because like
Mm.
I you do need to be a Star Wars fan to like make the Ahsoka show and like deal with big picture Force mythology, Ahsoka returning characters and stuff like that. Anyone can make a show about revolution and rebellions and government uprisings and slap a Star Wars skin on it. So it just depends.
I agree because I don't think you need to be a fan, but I think you need to respect it. And I feel like the examples Tony Gilroy and Dave Filoni, everyone loves the stuff that they do, and those are kind of your two examples. Dave Filoni is a huge fan,
Mm-hmm.
and Tony Gilroy isn't. But I feel like Tony Gilroy still respects it enough where I feel like personally, J.J. Abrams, maybe he was a fan of the original trilogy, but he did not respect the prequel trilogy in my mind. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that came through at points in the sequel trilogy where wrapping everything up, they could have paid a little more homage to the prequels. But I mean, it's neither here nor there at this point now. But
I feel like
that's my
J.J.
fine
Abrams.
line. I don't think
feel like
JJ
J.J.
respected
Abrams-
the prequels.
More
I
more
agree.
than he respected or didn't respect previous Star Wars, I think he feared it. I think he was scared of old Star Wars.
Yes,
And was-
that's a good way of putting it.
I think, but I don't know if I totally agree with that statement now. Because I feel like you need to respect it.
statement?
You need to have when you need to be a Star Wars fan to understand the lore and stuff. I think that is where you're working in constructs of like somebody else at Lucasfilm will give you those barriers where like this needs to happen. So I don't know if you need to be a fan of Star Wars. I think Lucasfilm needs to be a good moderator of
That's
those
true.
things.
Depends how
Because
well
I
they
think-
collaborate.
The thing with, to be honest, is like I'm really interested in how Mando and Grogu is going to be as a movie. With Favreau being a part of it, makes sense because Favreau's done a lot of movies, be outside of Star Wars. With that being said, I am a little, to be honest. I mean, Dave Filoni, I think he's great. I just don't think he fully knows how to make live action yet. And he could never make Andor, right? Which is fine. That's not his suit. He makes live action cartoons. With that being said, I think that there might be too much in his head a little bit to be like, well, this doesn't connect to this, and this doesn't connect to this, and that in that regard limits you, I think, as a storyteller. Versus being like, I'm gonna create this thing, and then my first draft was gonna be whatever I want it to be, and the Lucasfilm was like, okay, well, actually, here are these 5 notes. This actually doesn't make sense. Let's reconstruct this, but the story's great. I think that's a huge difference, and I think that's almost where Star Wars kind of needs to be and needs to go, instead of just being like, hey, you're like, I feel like Star Wars was one step away from being like, Kevin Smith, you make a Star Wars movie because you're a fan. Like Taika Waititi, you're a fan. It's like, I think that's the bad direction which we've talked about multiple times. Um, but anyway, that was. I'm glad we got there. I think we all are in agreement now.
This is not really off topic, but it made me think of it when you were talking about like the way it's made. Did you guys know? I was watching an interview with some comic authors. When they write comics, the artists that do the art for your issue, they have schedules such that the like pipeline for making comics, if you have different artists for different issues, you'll frequently have to write like your series out of order and write like episode 8 so they could start the art on it, and then do issues 1, 2, 3, and then maybe issue 10 if the artist needs that much lead time. Isn't that insane? I would hate that so much.
The world is insane with even animations like that too, where they're animating full episodes towards the end of a season, and it's like, well, the first episode's not even done. Like I think Batman the Animated Series, they had like 10 episodes, but they were, we really want to start with a Joker though, so they had to rush to make like 3 other episodes so that the story could then make sense, because they set a bunch of stuff up, so they had to like basically redo work that like it doesn't matter nowadays when you're streaming, but like when you're watching as a show, it doesn't make any sense. So it's like,
That's even more crazy to me because that's all in-house work. Like at least with comic artists, that's like borderline freelance work. You know, it's just working with the artist's independent schedules, and if it's this, it's this. But for if you're making your own show, you're making your own show with your own people. You should be able to hatch a schedule that works pretty well.
I think we're just living in
the world doesn't make
such
any
a
sense.
content-heavy era right now that the industry is still trying to catch up with how it can itself meet the demand of what it's trying to produce.
Yeah, that could be. Everyone's in over their heads and just flying by the seat of their pants.
This is one, I swear this is the last off-topic thing. Have you guys watched The Electric State yet? The Joe Russo, Anthony Russo Netflix movie with Chris Pratt and Millie Bobby Brown?
I didn't know that was the Russos, but no, I have no interest in that.
Yeah, I have not seen it either. I heard it's horrible. And the thing I thought was really interesting was I saw a review by the Great Movie Podcast. I forget what it's called. But they were like, I think the Russo brothers mistook, because they're like powerful people and they have been very vocal and very, I don't know why, the past weekend they've gotten into like 2 controversies. A, saying art movies shouldn't win Oscars because Harvey Weinstein blocked that or whatever, and so like popular movies were winning Oscars before Harvey Weinstein blocked it, whatever. That opens a whole can of worms, and they're very pro AI. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting when they were saying, somebody said that they mistook their guidance in the MCU as pure creativity, and then that's what you get with The Electric State, is that like there's basically people think that they're creative, and that's a harsh statement to say that they think someone's creative, but then they kind of throw everything at it where nothing actually sticks. And then they on this podcast they were saying everything in this movie feels like when Chewbacca like fake dies in Rise of Skywalker, because you want that dopamine hit when he's alive. And so they're like, there's actually no storytelling because nothing sticks, nothing's real. And that's like, oh, I can't imagine a full movie, which I'm very excited to watch this movie because it looks cool, but I cannot imagine a full movie full of those moments, which we all, I think, universally hate, since we know Chewbacca's not dead in that moment.
Well, you're not convincing me to watch this movie. And Matt, your last movie recommendation was also a dud. What was that one called? It was also a Netflix movie that sucked.
Did I like it?
Rebel Moon?
Yeah, Rebel Moon.
Oh, yeah. No, that wasn't my recommendation.
You made me watch it.
Yeah, you should watch the second part too. It's somehow worse. I know we've so much
Awesome.
so that I have no interest in doing a follow-up episode.
I want to watch the first part again, but longer. Did they make a longer version yet?
Yeah, and the second part too. That'd be great.
The only reason I would watch Electric State is because Chris Pratt is really cool. I know it's like a meme that everyone likes Chris Pratt. I know, and you guys are in on that crowd too. Like, Chris Pratt's so overrated. He is damn likable, and I cannot wait for this new Jurassic World movie to come out with Scarlett Johansson, and everyone realize, or at least the executives realize when it bombs, that to make a movie, make $1 billion, you need dinosaurs and Chris Pratt. He is very likable. As much as you hate
No.
that, maybe he doesn't have an Italian accent to be Mario, but he is
No, he's
damn
good
fun
at
to watch
Mario.
on scene.
I
He's
like
good at
him
Mario.
in
He's-
everything. He is funny. He is likable.
Mhm.
I like him. But my problem is the culture that we're living in, like I said, where it's just so content driven that the producers in Netflix, I'm sure, did not care what Electric State was about. They knew that the Russos were attached. They knew that Chris Pratt was attached. They knew that Millie Bobby Brown was attached. They said, that's fine. I don't care what it is. Just make that. Because you have those
Yeah.
names attached and people are going to watch it. We are part of the problem because I'm yelling at you, Luke, but I'm yelling at myself because I know that I'm going to watch it as well for those 4 reasons. And that's not,
I'm not calling this a problem. I think this is a solution.
it's a problem because the movie's
Did
going to
you,
be terrible. If the movie is terrible, then we need to not watch it. I mean, we need to get back to a
Yeah.
day
No.
and age where we watch and support good content and not bad
That is neither
content
here
because
nor there.
dinosaurs.
I just watched that terrible movie on Amazon Prime also. What's that one called? With Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon.
The wedding double
Yeah, the
booked,
wedding one.
What's it called?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Bad.
horrible, but it
Whatever.
was a
Damn.
perfectly fine way to spend an evening. I don't regret watching it.
Do you know how much the Electric State cost? This is the problem with things too. This is the problem with the world. Let me tell you. Do you know how much that cost though to make?
Money's not real. No, how much?
$320 million. Does that sound like a fake number?
Yeah,
That's crazy.
It's
it
insane.
always sounds fake. Money is fake.
The movie A Real Pain, that Jesse Eisenberg made, was made for $3 million. And it was like, yeah, movies should be made for less money because creativity is found within those restraints. Look at Star Wars, right? To bring it back to Star Wars, like look at the first Star Wars. Like the creativity is the reason why Star Wars is so good. And I think that's a big thing too. Where when people have problems with movies, like we're able to get great moments, within Star Wars universe because the money now is limitless. But at the same time, it limits the creativity of what we're going to be able to see. Like, we're still talking about how the Death Star has trenches in it for perspective. That's such a cool fact. They needed to then go and figure out how to do that versus being like, well, we can just make it with like AI or something, or that wouldn't even be a problem or a conversation. Anyway, I'm monologuing this entire episode, and this is about characters, and I think we've talked about like 3 characters so far. So I'm
That's
going
true.
to talk less
but-
this episode now.
Wait until after I push back on you so you can have a chance to defend yourself, because I have heard that before, and I do agree to a large degree that create the financial constraints will help boost creativity, but people talk about that like it's the only source of creativity. That you can still be creative with a lot of money. If you have less money, it does force you to be creative in different areas, but it's not like you are forbidden from having any creative impulses with a lot of money.
Correct.
Yeah,
that's
no,
possible. I
I-
think it's more of a symptom than the disease, though, because I feel like the problem is
Yeah.
when you have $300 million. Like I said, these major studios are just insulting the intelligence of their viewer, where they don't care about the creativity, they don't care about the story. All they care about it are the names that are attached to it, because they know that they can sell that. They know that they can sell Chris Pratt, Bobby Brown, Russo brothers, and the idea of whatever this movie is. They don't need to oversee the filming of this movie to make sure that it's actually good. I mean, I don't know what the script review process is, but I mean, lately it feels like things just get rubber stamped as opposed to like having somebody who like actually critiques these things give like notes back, because it's the Russo brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, they made $1 trillion off of the Avengers movies. Like, who's going to critique the Russo brothers?
I hear people complain about the exact opposite also, where they're like, oh, these Marvel movies are all the exact same because the studios are intervening too much and you need to let the directors have their own breathing room and creative identities in these different movies. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you make a bad one, you can always point to a flaw. At the end of the day, if the movie's bad, we're going to blame something, and if the movie's great, then great. There's no perfect way to do it.
Well, I think with the
Everyone's
MCU,
trying to make a good
though,
movie.
Yeah, that's true. But with the MCU, I think that's the big problem too, is that like the studio have become the writers, I think. So it's one of those things where everything is so connected that it's just like, well, we need someone to basically just like write something that connects all this shit together. Right? And so it's like and that's why I think Guardians of the Galaxy was such a big hit when it first came out, is because that felt like the first movie to be like, okay, James Gunn, do your own thing, versus this is not really connected at this point in time to any of the other bullshit we have going on, right? And so like the Russo brothers, like obviously they did a huge impossible task, and they really were able to hone things together. But again, I think that is what that the podcast said, is they mistook their leadership for creativity, and they're great leaders. They can organize this madness, and I think a huge part to do with that, to be honest, is working on Arrested Development and understanding all these intricate jokes. Like, if there's a direct line, I think I would say, from Arrested Development to Infinity War, and the fact that you have to direct all of these crazy storylines together, and that's exactly what Arrested Development did, and that's exactly what Infinity War did. With that being said, I don't know how creative those movies are in the Russo brothers' perspective. I mean, very creative in the fact of, like, some writing, which they didn't write it. There's really, creative aspects in the CGI. There's really creative aspects in the costuming and blah, blah. But, like, it is just weird, I think, when you mistake what you are and where your place is at. Not that you can't go out of that box.
And to defend myself real quick, because Luke, you're absolutely right, and I've made that critique many times, that the new Marvel movies are just made by committee and there's no creativity involved. I'm not saying that the problem is that they're not letting creatives be creative. It's the opposite. I think that they're not letting these creative people be creative, and I think that the problem comes from the stories. It's the script that's the problem. Either not writing a script and starting before a story is final, which I feel like has been the problem of late in the Marvel universe, where they constantly have to go back and do these reshoots, not because of visual effects or anything like that, but because they're test screening these things and they're saying, like, the story doesn't make sense, and so they have to go back and they have to, like, add in plot lines and reshoot, like, all of these scenes and dialogue and stuff like that. I think the problem is they're filming this stuff before they have a script. I'm guessing that's probably what happened with Electric State or whatever it's called, is that the Russos had this idea, Netflix didn't care, they rubber stamped it without approving or overseeing any sort of script, and then they just kind of filmed whatever came out instead of having this time to work on the script and the actual story. Because the problem is the stories. I don't think the problem is the visual effects. I don't think the problem is the actors. I think the problem is just
Chris
stories
Pratt's only a
are
solution.
just getting worse. He is. I love Chris Pratt. I just think he does terrible movies. I hate the Jurassic World movies, and I saw them all.
Me too. I think that's the thing, though, is that I think Chris Pratt is the quote-unquote solve. I literally do think that, like, you hit something jokingly, but correct is that they're like, this movie sucks. Let's make it at least a little better with Chris Pratt. With that being said, I did like the Super Mario Brother movie. That was actually fun. And I
liked the first Jurassic World movie.
It was okay. It was my least. I don't love Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World, or 3. Wait, is Lost World 2 or 3?
That's
Lost
right.
World is 2.
Thank you.
Jurassic Park 3 has no subtitle.
Jurassic World less than those. I don't really like those, but it was okay. Jurassic Park is just one of the best movies of all time. Still the best CGI of all time. I'll never forget when Max texted me, like, in 2018, Matt, what's the best CGI in a movie of all time? I said, Jurassic Park. Why? You're like, yeah, that's what I thought you would say. My family was taking bets or whatever. I was like, yes.
Jurassic Park or Jurassic World 2 is the one where the girl lets all the dinosaurs out because they're clones, like she's a clone. And she's like, yeah, they deserve to live in Los Angeles. And I was like, oh my God, that was the worst idea ever. That's when I hopped out of that franchise. The end of the second one. Because I did not see the third one, but I hear it was Duty.
The end of the second one of the second trilogy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who's excited for the third trilogy?
This was the fifth movie and only the second plot that you were eventually like, okay.
I actually don't think I've seen Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World. Just bits and pieces.
Not a Vince Vaughn fan? Or what?
I forgot Vince Vaughn.
Guess not. I didn't even know he was in it.
I was going to say Jeff Goldblum.
And Julianne Moore. It's like, what are you doing in this movie? Well, you guys are, like, really good actors. Vince Vaughn is that's a sus statement to say on my part.
Vince Vaughn's a fine actor. Is that what you're implying?
He's a fine actor, right? He's not a great actor. Well,
He's
he
no-
makes sense.
That's true. I would never say he's a great actor.
He's no Wayne Knight.
All right, back to Andor though. Thank you for indulging us on that tangent, listener.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. We should rename this episode Andor characters and rants,
among other things.
Yeah, among other things.
Nemec and
Skeen. Dr. Pepper. I don't know what you want from us.
That's true. It's a Dr. Pepper.
This is how I'm living 24/7, baby. Nemec and Skeen, they are, I guess, Max, for those of our listeners that don't care about the Aldani arc and the characters therein, Nemec is the one that wrote the manifesto. He was the young kid who fell asleep on watch, and then Skeen is the one that put a gun to his head and threatened him and said that that's so unsafe, and he's the one that had that line about how the tree remembers what the axe forgets, and then tries to steal half the money with Cassian and gets shot for it. These are two characters. Yeah, they're both scoundrels in their own right.
Why is Nemec a scoundrel?
Rebel.
Well, that's a rebel. That's different than scoundrel. These are different Star Wars archetypes.
I guess what is a scoundrel?
In Star Wars, it is somebody who turns their back and tries to steal the money at the end. This is like a textbook scoundrel move. Han Solo,
okay,
scoundrel,
by that definition, yes.
Until he returns to save Luke Skywalker during the trench run. Then he becomes a rebel again.
So is he a scoundrel again when he turns his back on everything when Kylo Ren turns to the dark side? Ben Solo turns to the dark side? When he goes back to smuggling?
Well, I
he's
mean,
leaving a lot.
He's not like taking the money and run. He's not like, well, maybe he's being selfish in a fatherly way. I don't know. I got to think about that. There's scoundrels, smugglers, rebels, Imperials. I don't know. What's another Star Wars archetype?
Jedi.
And
Sith.
I'm mostly
And
trying to
George
think of
Lucas's-
context of Andor.
Well, there's no Jedi or
token-
Sith in Andor.
I'll say token woman in George Lucas's mind, but not in Andor.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Nemec and Skeen are also, I would also put in the realm of dichotomy, where they're both fighting for the same cause, and Nemec, on that spectrum of whether it's for personal gain or for the cause, Nemec is all the way slid over to for the cause, and Skeen is all the way slid over to personal gain. He says as much to Andor that, I am a rebel, but it's just me against everyone else. And that the example of those two is great, because more so than Vel and Cinta and their example to Andor, they interact with Cassian a lot more. I mean, Nemec in perpetuity now with his manifesto, and then Skeen, the way he was willing or trying to abandon the cause and just take the money and run, like that is going to stick with Andor forever. And he obviously objected to Skeen doing it in that moment. He shot him. But Cassian does take a bit of that with him going forward, whether he wants to or not. And that's, I mean, it's a story arc that Cassian is meant to go on, but that's just such a tragic fact that even though you don't want this person to impact you, they are.
Mm-hmm. It's a story of, I think your heart versus your head, right? Like Nemec is the heart and Skeen is the head, where it's like, yeah, he knows he could take this money and run and he can live well off for the rest of his days, but his heart wants to do the altruistic thing and be for the cause, even though it doesn't make sense. And the irony is, we know as the viewer that it doesn't make sense because it does lead to his death and he does die doing all of this, but he does it for the betterment of the galaxy.
Yeah. I think again, we're going back. Sorry, Luke.
Do you think that Cassian would have shot Skeen had it not been so personal in that moment where they were saving Nemec or trying to save Nemec? Do you think if it was, an hour later and Nemec had already died and then Cassian and Skeen had that moment alone, I think Cassian would have been a lot more willing to take half of it and run.
I think emotions were running high in that moment. But you think, how would that have played out? You think he would have taken him up on the offer? Not just not shoot him, but he would have done it with him?
I don't think he would have. I think he would have just let him go, to be honest. I don't think he would have.
That's kind of how I envision that, yeah.
Yeah. I don't even know if he would stick around. I just don't think that's going to be, at that time, I don't think Andor's motive is, I think he would let Skeen go, knowing what he's going to do. Because I think if Nemec, I think he ended up caring about Nemec, obviously. So I think he would have stayed just to see how that go through, and when act none the wiser when Skeen's gone with the money. To be honest.
Well, I guess the point I'm trying to make is if we remove Nemec entirely from the situation, say Nemec, that crate of credits crushed his head instead of his spine, and he was dead instantly, or he died some other more graceful way.
Jesus.
I think the reason that Cassian shot Skeen is because he was emotional, and because Nemec was. I'm trying to think of a word better than radicalizing, a more positive word. He was convincing Cassian of the altruistic and charitable nature of the rebellion, and Cassian was, very emotional at that time and fully drinking that tea. And then Skeen suggested this, complete 180. And I think if he did that, 2 days prior, I think Cassian would have been all about it. Because at this point, he's just a mercenary, and that's really the first time we ever see him act on behalf of the rebellion as opposed to on behalf of himself for the betterment of the rebellion and not himself.
Yeah, that's true. I think also Andor's looking for a purpose, right? A lot of the time, and I feel like once he hears Nemec's manifesto, it gives him purpose, and then I think everything since then has cemented him into the rebellion, which is why he's so. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like he's consistently looking for, and I think a lot of that. Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say I don't know if that's true though, because I mean he does. He's a guy. He's a man of honor. I mean, he does have some sort of code, Cassian, because obviously he knew that was wrong. Emotions were high. I think that if Nemec not died right there and it was less emotional, he wouldn't have killed him necessarily. But I do think it was an emotional response. But I don't think he would have taken the money and run. I think he was hired to do a job, and he was planning on fulfilling that job. But after he did fill the job, he still took the money from Luthen and ran. I mean, he still tried to get out of Dodge and leave the rebellion behind him. I mean, he was kind of sucked back into it when he was arrested, radicalized again in prison, found out what they were doing. But I mean, he wasn't in the heart of the rebellion at that point. I mean, he doesn't really come back around to the rebellion until the season finale of season 1, where he kind of starts to be more about the actual cause.
I think that's something about his own accord, where again, I think it's like if somebody else is suggesting something, and he, realistically, I think Andor knows Skeen presumably is a scuzzy guy. He's double crossing his entire team, and he's known all those people longer than Andor's known all those people. So presumably he's gonna be on the chopping block instantly when they, get out of wherever. But I think Andor does things by his own accord because he has his own moral compass, and whatever he's doing things for a reason, and he's like, I don't think he's gonna hop on Skeen's plan because that's not, he doesn't know that compass is an easy way, but is it the right way? I don't know.
He's kind of, I guess, in that moment, during that arc, those two characters serve as the poles to which Andor was in the middle, because Nemec was in it all for the cause, altruism. Skeen was in it for himself, and Castian was kind of right in the middle, where he wasn't going to rip them off, he wasn't going to steal the money at the end, but he's also not in it for the cause. He's still in it for his cut at the end. Because I even misspoke. I said that he eventually gets his money from Luthen and runs, but he doesn't even get the money from Luthen. I think he does take his cut right then and there, doesn't he? I mean, doesn't he basically steal his cut of it out of that money and then leave?
Yeah, steal's a harsh word. It was rightfully his. He fulfilled his job. He earned his money and took his pay. I do not agree that he was in the middle of that spectrum. I think he was almost on like another line, just observing everything, because he was not motivated by the rebellion at all on Aldhani. He didn't give a damn about it. He tells Nemec, Nemec is nervous the night before and he's not sleeping, and Cassian said that he slept fine and that once the adrenaline kicks in, the tiresome will wear off. And then it's later on Narkina 5 when he starts to experience the same thing that Nemec was, once he does become more of a believer in a cause, that he doesn't sleep the night before the jailbreak on Narkina 5. And so I do think that the Nemec and Skeen dynamic is an important thing pushing him forward, but at that point, at least, I do not agree that Cassian was in the middle of that spectrum. I think he was on a whole different line. And to talk about something that Matt said, because this is why I wanted to do this episode. After we did our Cyril Karn episode, it occurred to me how differently we interpret the same stories. And in this example, I disagree with you, but I don't think you are objectively wrong like I do with Cyril Karn. I think I feel a great amount of vindication in all of my thoughts on Cyril Karn, and I think you're completely wrong. But this, I don't think you're necessarily wrong, but I just understood it differently. that, oh my god, and now I'm losing my train of thought. I should have written it down. What were you talking about with Cassian on Aldani? Shoot, it'll come to me. Come back to me.
I liked everything you just said, though, Luke. I think that there is that aspect of, um, I agree with you partially in the fact as well. I mean, I'm somewhere in between, much like Andor, I guess. But I feel like in that scene, I don't think he cared either way. But I think he cared about what Nemec stood for, and I think, like you said, Andor's a person of honor, and I think he saw that in Nemec as well, and so I think that is a big part of it too. So whether it's rebellion or non-rebellion, I think it's more or less on a personal level versus kind of like bird's eye view rebellion or non-rebellion or mercenary. I think he's just like, this person cares for something as much as I care for something else, so I think when you have Skeen go against that, is kind of the last straw.
Yeah, I didn't like
remember-
everything you said, Luke. I disagree, obviously, because you were contradicting what I was trying to say. But you can't say that he was on a completely separate line observing. Like, the entire show is all about choosing sides, and choosing sides in different ways. But I think he's definitely in the middle. He is on that line, but he's in the middle of it, because if he truly wasn't for the rebellion at all, which he is a little bit because he doesn't like the Empire, he's always against the Empire, then he would have taken the money and run. He could have shared it with Skeen, or he could have killed him and taken it all for himself, but he didn't.
That's what I'm saying. I think he would have if it wasn't for Nemec being on that table dying. If Nemec had died a day before, I think he absolutely would have taken that money and run, because he was not involved in the rebellion. He did not believe in their cause even a little bit at that time.
I disagree. I think if Nemec didn't die there, maybe he wouldn't have killed Skeen, but I don't think he would have taken the money and run.
I remember now what Matt said about Cassian, that he was kind of seeking purpose at this point also. And it reminds me of a line from Jyn Erso in Rogue One when, I forget what the exact dialogue was around it, but someone says, like, how do you stand to see the Imperial flag reign? And she says it's not a problem if you don't look up, which is a good story arc for her, and I think it's done way better in this, because that's where Cassian is at the beginning of the story, that I don't think he's particularly opposed to the Empire. He uses them to steal credits, but he doesn't oppose to them on like a, I mean, I guess he is against the Empire, but he's not starting a rebellion. He's not, he's just out for himself, and they have credits to give away if you do it the right way. I think he's more of a character that is not seeking purpose, but is having purpose kind of hurled at him from several different people. Like right after Aldani, when he goes to get Marva and he tries to run away with her, and he's like, I got all this money, we can leave. And she doesn't leave, and she insists on staying behind because she has this purpose and she is invested in the cause. And I think that starts to impact him. And then Narkina 5, obviously, he has to start trying to fight against the Empire. I just recently looked up the name because I was tired of calling it Space Miami. It starts with a V, but in Space Miami, he was just trying to keep to himself. And then the shore trooper arrested him for no good reason. He was like, "Why are you running?" And he says, "I'm just going this way," which is another great scene. He was just trying to mind his own business, not fight the Empire, not be with the Empire, just not look up and do his own thing. And it was not an option with him. Purpose is thrust upon him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's something there. Because remember, too, his whole story arc, starting in the very beginning, is looking for his sister. And the rest of this whole season has nothing to do with that. I mean, they never bring it up to the point that we wonder if that's going to come back up in season 2, which we assume that it will, because it's a well-written show. But it is very possible that it won't. And the reason it won't is just because that's not what the story is about. That was just establishing his purpose, and in doing that, was thrust into this whole other one. So yeah, I do agree with that.
That's a great point. There's a good purpose of that too, of like, and like a sadness, deep sadness, if it doesn't come back around, and the fact that that's what set him off on his purpose. And I feel like sometimes in life, things don't work out. You don't find the answers. That's just something. I mean, that's not how really shows work, but thematically, it works for his character. And then it's even sadder in the fact that he dies not knowing.
Right.
Oh, that would be so sad. I agree with Max that it's a funny thread to pull on. Like, the only reason we believe that the Kandari, I forget the exact name of that planet, the only reason we believe that that's going to come back up is not like structurally or narratively, but just because we trust that this is a well-written show.
Yeah, and like Matt said, that's not really how shows work, so that's why I'm assuming it will come up. But yeah, it's entirely possible that that's just, like I said, that's not what the show's about.
Kino Loy, fan
Here we
favorite,
go.
Max's
Maybe.
favorite. He also I kind of shot my bullet a little early with the "it's not a problem if you don't look up" comparison, because he is also a good example of a character that does this better than Jyn Erso or whatever in Rogue One when they introduced that sort of idea. But that's how Kino Loy's living. Like he doesn't like the Empire, he doesn't like what they're doing, but he just needs to, do his work his and then he'll be released eventually. And it's not until he is forced into a situation that he has to act that he becomes particularly motivated and invested in. It's weird to call that the rebellion. It's a rebellion against the Empire, but it's not like capital T the rebellion. But that's another great example for Cassian to see at that point in his story that even if, he's also obviously going through a lot of the same thing, but maybe Cassian had gone through it like a couple days before Kino Loy, but you don't have an option with tyranny of this sort to just ignore it, and you have to act if you can.
Yeah.
Again, it's hard to talk about characters and not themes because it's so thematic, but I do think that they did the Arcana 5 story arc very well, and they very intentionally made this prison a labor camp, right? It's not a typical prison where you just go there and rot away. They gave them something to do, and I think it's because that arc is kind of more about blind obedience and just doing what you're told without asking any questions and what can be going on in the background when you're doing that, such as they're literally building the Death Star without even noticing it. And so I think Kino Loy is kind of he's the symbolism for that theme, basically, right? He just wants to keep his head down, kind of like you said with the flag looking up, but he just wants to do what he's told. The Empire says, just do this, don't ask questions, and you'll get out of here. And that's all he wants. But in doing that and never asking questions, obviously something worse ends up brewing in the background, and they uncover this whole conspiracy. They're never being let out. And then obviously that's what leads to his self-sacrifice, which, do I have to go over my whole spiel about Kino Loy again? I feel like I've already did this. I'll have our tech team also hyperlink the greatest moments, best quotes, and best characters, I think, have all mentioned Kino Loy. So check out those episodes.
Man likes Kino Loy. You'll have to take our word for it if you're not going to go back to previous episodes. Also, while we're here, because we're probably not going to do a full episode on just the settings and themes of Andor, but I'm going to touch on it. Maybe we will. I'm going to touch on it briefly here because we've never really talked about it. How sinister, but also simple the prison system is on Narkina 5, where their production is tested against everyone else in the floor, and the loser gets zapped, and then the floor manager is tested against everyone else on that floor, and the worst floor's production manager gets zapped. I love that. Like, I know it's really dark and it's not like a cool thing, but that's awesome.
I'm really glad that you don't work for GE anymore and that you're watching Andor taking notes on their management style. Like, oh, wow, that's actually really efficient.
I was going to say they actually took that from Amazon.
It is a fun space story production motivator.
Motivator is a stretch. I'm motivated if I have a donut at lunch. I don't know.
I know. I couldn't think of exactly the right word. Motivator is a bit positive,
well, no,
but
maybe,
it's not wrong.
Right, yeah. It's not. Yeah, incentive is more of what I'm thinking, I guess. Yeah.
Brasso. I don't have actually that much to say on Brasso. The only note I have is that he is the ultimate Chad because he takes care of Marva, and we talked about how he's the big man, how he starts the riot, and all that was awesome. But a moment that's slept on more in his characterization is the first time we meet him, when Cassian comes up to him one morning and says, "Hey, Brasso, if anyone asks, you and I were together all night." And Brasso's just like, "All right." What a homie. We all need a friend like that.
Yeah.
He's a homie. He's a good friend. I don't have a whole lot more to say about Brasso.
Same.
2 thumbs
Do
up.
not think we're going to say homie, though. We're going to say a derogatory term. You work
Mon
me all
Mothma
night.
and Luthen. And I guess we can toss Saw Gerrera into this conversation also, because now we're getting into characters that are not just designed to move Cassian along his character arc. These are characters that have their own arcs and their own impact to the Star Wars galaxy and the story itself. And I'm going to have a hard time separating my thoughts and feelings on Mon Mothma and Luthen in the show from Luthen is not yet in the book, but I'm reading the book Reign of the Empire right now, and it's all about Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera and Bail Organa in the time after Revenge of the Sith. Are you reading it too?
Yeah, I'm listening to it.
It's great.
On Libby.
Very cool. But it's really good. And there's a lot of good Mon Mothma stuff that's not quite in the show that I'll try to avoid talking about for spoiler purposes. But like you said before, Max, Mon Mothma is trying to do this as legally as possible, but we're already in 5 BBY, the timeline, 5 years before A New Hope. So she's already pretty far along that route, because in Mask of Fear, she's trying to do everything she can legally, and that's 14 years before Andor. And so she is a lot further along than she gets credit for, I think. And she knows that she's, funding the rebellion. She doesn't think that she's doing everything legally at this point. She says to her friend, whose name escapes me, that my politics are a bit strong for your taste, in one of the most well-written scenes in all of Star Wars. And then there's Luthen, who is working with Mon Mothma, which I think is going to be a very interesting dynamic in season 2, because Luthen is kind of in the middle of Saw Gerrera and Mon Mothma, where, it's the what value or how far is too far, and that whole debate that we've talked about at length. And I'm very excited to see where Luthen ends up, because in season 1 of Andor, he's almost more, I'm not going to say sadistic, but more cutthroat than Saw Gerrera. That, like, he's the one that convinces Saw Gerrera to let Krieger and his 30 men die. Like, that wasn't Saw Gerrera's idea. That was Luthen's idea. And I'm excited to see what, if any, fallout with Mon Mothma there is around that and their two ideologies being different, and how that will affect Cassian. I'm also really excited to see Cassian and Mon Mothma interact, because it'll be very good for him. But we know where Cassian ends up, so it's not good enough for him.
Yeah. So I'm a very visual person, which is a great thing for a podcast. But if Skeen, Nemec were on a spectrum, those were two poles on one line, with Cassian in the middle being pulled back and forth, I think Mon Mothma, Saw, and Luthen are 3 corners of a triangle. I don't think Luthen is in between them necessarily, where he's being pulled back and forth. I think they all serve 3 different functions that need to come together in order to have a successful rebellion. I think Mon Mothma is kind of like the heart of the operation. Like, she's doing it for the good reason. She wants to do it with the least amount of bloodshed, the least amount of casualties, as in and out as possible.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I had the similar thought, but now convince me why Luthen and Saw Gerrera aren't at the same point.
Because like I said, they just serve different functions. So if Mon Mothma's the heart, I think Luthen is the head. He knows what it's going to take. It's going to take a little bit of everything. It's going to take a little bit of sacrifice, such as Anton Krieger and his 30 men. And I think Saw Gerrera is just the fist. He just wants to smash and destroy. He doesn't care about sacrifice, so long as it's not worthless. I think what he didn't like was tactically leaving his men to die, sacrificing them. I think he doesn't care about death. We kind of see that in Rogue One. He just dies and takes it like a champ. But I think he just wants to smash. He just wants to blow everything up. He doesn't care about bloodshed. He doesn't care about casualties on either side, because I think he knows it's going to take good people to die. And I think Luthen realizes that to an extent, but you can't just have a tantrum the entire time and get what you want. Like, you do need to be smart about it. And so I think Luthen isn't being torn. I think he is in the middle. They're a triangle. They're all kind of equally pushing and pulling, and he's just trying to make sure that all the parts work cooperatively, because that's what he is. he's basically the glue to everything. I mean, he's the one who's bringing Cassian in on it.
Mhm.
He's the go-between to Saw. He's the one secretly meeting up with Mon Mothma. I think he is just a piece to the puzzle so much than he is kind of moving back and forth. I don't think he's going to end up one way or another. I don't think he's going to be more radicalized than he is now, because I think he's fully radicalized. And I don't think he's going to become more sensitive like Mon Mothma either. But I think he kind of articulates it well in that he kind of also understands his role as a tragic one and that he is damned by what he does. Because he knows he's going to die. And I think we all, as the viewer, kind of know that too. I find it very unlikely that he's going to ride off into the sunset and not show up in Rogue One.
Yeah, I think definitely not right off into the sunset. But what if he just like gets captured or something? And no, he would be killed. They wouldn't take him alive.
What if
Yeah,
he
I
gets
agree. He's
captured
gonna
and he's
die.
held on the Death Star? He just blows up at the end of A New Hope.
That'd be interesting. Do you think that Luthen and Saw Gerrera are gonna like team up more formally in season 2? I'm trying to remember that episode of Rebels where they bring in Saw Gerrera. Does Mon refer to him as a former member of the Alliance or just a separate rebel faction? Because that's what Rebels is also all about, is pulling in all those separate factions into the one alliance. And I can't remember if Saw was ever a member of it officially and then got kicked out for doing something, or if he was just doing things and never got asked to officially join. Either way, I think they can tell a great story. I'm just trying to figure out how that'll probably go down.
Off the top of my head, I don't remember.
I don't think that he'll join though. Like I think what Max said too is that like that's like it's I feel like Saw Gerrera is like a friend who like you semi-agree with, but like is kind of a wild card and loose cannon. You're like, if I go out to a bar with this person, what are they gonna do? You know, are they gonna be a problem? And you know, Saw Gerrera is gonna be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have honestly that much to say about them in relation to Cassian. I like both of their. Luthen doesn't really have a story arc for season 1. I think he does, and it sort of culminates in the speech that Marva gives in the ensuing riot, and it keeps cutting to Luthen, and it looks like something is clicking in his brain, and he's sort of, something's changing inside a little bit. But we never really get a great resolution to that, other than when he doesn't shoot Cassian on sight, I guess. Shortly after that. But most of the stuff for Luthen, I'm excited just on speculation, I guess, instead of purely season 1.
I know what you mean about how it seems like we didn't get much of an arc for Luthen in season 1. I disagree with that, I think. But I think the reason for that is because we don't see his jumping on point. And his is the only one that we don't really know either. Like, we don't see Mon Mothma or Saw Gerrera's jumping on points, but we do kind of know them. Whereas, like I said, it's hard to tell the show with so many different characters, just showing them where they are kind of on that spectrum. I think these 3 characters are kind of the embodiment of that spectrum, and all the other side characters are the smaller stories of how people jump onto it. So I also don't know if we're going to get that in season 2, backstory to Luthen for why he's part of this, or again, if that's just not part of the story, he just kind of is there, and I'm okay with that as well. But if that makes sense, I think like the characters kind of serve different purposes for telling the story thematically, and theirs isn't about how you become radicalized or how you join the rebellion. Theirs is just where you are on that spectrum of what you do within it.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the thought of telling that story had never really occurred to me, but whether or not it's in Andor season 2 or in a book or comic 50 years in the future.
That's true. We'll get it one way or another eventually.
The backstory to Luthen is such a ripe story to tell. Do you think he started as an antiquities dealer or as a rebel and then formed the other alias to fit his needs? Like, either way, it's super interesting. I don't see how you can form a successful antiquities shop on Coruscant like that as just a front. Like, that seems like something you'd have to dedicate a lot of time to. But then that would be super cool to see how an actual, just affluent antiquities dealer gets so invested into tearing down the Empire. Man, I hope we do see that in Andor season 2, because I'm sure it would be. I mean, it's the best Star Wars media we've ever gotten of all time, if you ask me. And so I'm sure it'll be better than whatever book or comic they would write about it. But I'll take what I can get. That's really exciting.
Yeah, the good thing about Andor is it is very confident in what it is. So we know whether we get that or not, it is because of the story that they want told. And
Yeah,
there's
it won't be an oversight.
exactly, there's a chance that this is just not part of the story, and we'll get that gap filled in a different format later on down the road.
All right. We are running out of time. The last two characters I wanted to mention, but I don't have much to say about them, but they were present. Bix, who it's sad, Tim got shot, and so that's a bummer. He was kind of a traitor anyway. And then she gets tortured. I'm excited to see her in season 2, but she doesn't do that much in season 1. And B2EMO, always a treat. Not really the most character-driven or driving character in the show, but always a pleasure to see him. You guys have anything you wanted to say about either of them?
Not too much. I'll reserve my comments for Dedra Miro. I assume we're going to talk about her.
Do you want to talk about Dedra Miro? Because she never interacts with Cassian, and she is an Imperial. I didn't think it was all that relevant. What do you want to say?
Well, it's hard to talk about her and not talk about Cyril Karn, so we'll try to keep it brief. Just that. Again, one of the things that this show is trying to show us is that spectrum that I'm talking about, doing the right thing for the good reasons or doing good things for the bad reasons. And they are also on that spectrum, but they, I would say, are on a different line, they being Cyril and Dedra, for how they go about things. I know, Luke, you disagree about Cyril. We'll hyperlink to that episode. But I think it's cool watching that same kind of conflict in reverse, in Dedra being mirrored from, like, Mon Mothma.
Yes, I agree with that. Sorry,
I third that.
Yeah, and I'm also really excited to see where Dedra goes in season 2. I know she's like a villain, but someone's got to be the boss there. I hope she does rise the ranks and gets to a prominent position. I am rooting for her.
I know it's a weird thing because I do like Dedra also, but it's like, yeah, she is the bad guy, but it's like, but I get it.
I know.
It's like
if she dies, it's not like the Empire will go down with her. And it's what I say when I've been talking about Reign of the Empire, that book about Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera and Bail Organa. It's great, and it's not a particularly intriguing elevator pitch because it's like a story that we're very familiar with, characters that we're very familiar with. It's just the way they experience an event that we're already very familiar with, and it's like we already know 90% of this Venn diagram, and we're just exploring this last part, and it's still amazing.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. I don't know if we necessarily need to see her rise the ranks. I mean, like you said, they'll go on just fine without her, and they've already established major... I always forget his name. I want to say it's Ratatat, but I know that's a Pokemon.
Partagaz.
Partagaz, whatever. Who, even characters like that, who are just like a stock, static, you're a bad guy, are always compelling characters too. I feel like that actor's having a lot of fun chewing the scenery, as critics say, in that role.
I agree. It always makes me think of, in animation, I feel like Rebels specifically, but I'm sure it's everything. Whenever there is a stock bad guy, it's always an Imperial officer with his visor pulled really far down, so they don't have to deal with facial animation. And you could go that route in this, or you could just give it to an actor and be like, yeah, you're an Imperial. Go nuts.
That's basically what they did. He's like, yep, I'm a professional actor.
It's nice to have that sort of liberty. Does anyone have any final thoughts on the characters of Andor? Did I miss anyone? Anything else you wanted to say before we get into our force for thought? Does anyone have any force for thought?
I do have a force for thought, and I'll try to keep this one brief. So, Return of the Jedi, Space Battle, Attack of the Death Star 2. Lando is piloting the Millennium Falcon. Obviously, you have to have a co-pilot. That's well established. So he's got 9 Num. Where he comes from, I don't know. But, we know from Aftermath that Lobot is alive. So, whatever. Put a pin in that.
We do know that? That's interesting.
Yeah, I realized that much later on. Yes, apparently it was revealed in Aftermath that Lobot lives beyond Return of the Jedi, because I finished reading the Star Wars comic book leading up to Return of the Jedi, and Lobot never died. And I was like, what is his deal? So I eventually just kind of...
That's crazy. I was definitely expecting him to die.
But anyway, Lando's piloting, 9 Num is co-piloting. I think they just have a random rebel kind of shuffling around in the back of the cockpit.
2, yeah.
There's 2 of them? I've only noticed
There's one behind each of them.
That's interesting. What's he doing there? What's that guy doing?
That there's deleted scenes of several people in the Millennium Falcon. I don't know if it's the same guy, but there's deleted scenes of people in the gunner seat up top and down below.
Well, that makes sense. But what's this guy doing in the cockpit?
I don't know. If we're to believe
running.
Smuggler's Run, he's doing engineering work.
That's a great point.
Great
Okay,
point.
yeah, because there was a while where they tried saying that was actually canon too. But that makes sense. I was watching it the other day, and I was so distracted by this guy because he kept kind of like moving around, like from one seat to the next, like pushing buttons, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" Every
Is he moving
time
from one
we
seat to the
see-
next, or is it two guys?
I mean, they're not just sitting there with their hands crossed, which is what everyone else does in the
Mhm.
Millennium Falcon whenever they're flying. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like, what are you contributing to right now? Why are you needed? If they were in the gunner, that would make sense. And that's interesting to hear that was in a deleted scene. I did not know that, but it makes sense.
Interesting.
Good force for thought though.
Max. Yeah.
That's some
like that.
some
I'm
that's some
gonna rewatch it
gummies
now.
to chew on as I go forward. Thank you for listening to our discussion on Andor, among other things. You can reach out to us on social media or email forceforthought@gmail.com, and we'll see you next week.
See you, Sammy.